My name is Sarah Marshall, and I am 43 years old. For 19 years, I raised my sister's son, Leo, as my own, pouring my life, my savings, and my heart into a boy whose birth certificate bore my sister's name, but whose life was entirely built by my hands. My sister, Megan, had walked away from him when he was just 6 months old, leaving a diaper bag on my porch and a scribbled note saying she couldn't handle the anchor of a child. For nearly 2 decades, I was the only mother he knew. I patched his knees, stayed up through his midnight fevers, and scraped together every penny from my job as a high school guidance counselor to fund his dream of attending the university's aerospace engineering program. Then, last week, at Leo's 19th birthday dinner at the Riverside Bistro, Megan walked back into our lives, flanked by a high-priced estate attorney. She slid a legal packet across the table, smiled a superficial, dynamic smile, and announced that since Leo was now a legal adult, she was exercising her maternal rights to claim his grandfather's multi-million-dollar trust fund, a fund that required her biological signature to unlock. She looked at me, then at the boy I had raised, and said, "Thanks for doing the heavy lifting, Sarah. I'll take it from here." Before we get into the rest of this story, please take a moment to like and subscribe, but only if this story truly resonates with you. And drop your location and local time in the comments below. I want to know exactly where you are listening from right now. Now, let me take you back to the winter of 2007, to a freezing, rain-slicked Tuesday morning in Millfield, Ohio, and the sound of a porch screen door that wouldn't latch right. Growing up in the Marshall house, there were 2 daughters, but the scales were never balanced. My sister, Megan, was 2 years younger than me, but she occupied 3 times the space. She was beautiful in that effortless, symmetrical way that made people stop her in grocery stores. Bright blue eyes, golden hair, and a sharp, silver tongue that could talk my parents into or out of anything. My parents, Arthur and Eleanor Marshall, viewed Megan as their crowning achievement. Arthur ran a small auto repair shop downtown, and Eleanor did part-time bookkeeping for a local lumber yard. They were salt-of-the-earth, middle-class people who valued appearances above all else, and Megan gave them the appearance of success. I was the quiet one, the daughter who kept her nose in textbooks, tracked the family expenses out of necessity, and earned a master's degree in education without a single dollar of parental assistance. I wasn't difficult. I was simply the architecture that held the house up, while Megan was the painting on the wall. Megan lived her life like a storm, leaving wreckage in her wake and expecting everyone else to clean it up. When she was 22, she came home from a weekend in Columbus and announced she was pregnant. She didn't know the father's name, and she didn't care to find out. My parents panicked about the neighbors' whispers, but within an hour, Megan had them convinced it was a tragic, romantic mistake. When Leo was born in the summer of 2007, Megan treated him like a prop for photos for exactly 3 weeks. Then the novelty evaporated. The midnight feedings, the endless laundry, the heavy, unglamorous reality of a newborn caught up to her. On that Tuesday in December, I came home from my counselor job to find 2 black canvas bags and a plastic infant car seat sitting on my front porch. The rain was coming down sideways, soaking the edges of the blankets. Tucked into the side pocket of the car seat was a piece of lined notebook paper. It was Megan's handwriting, loose and hurried. "Sarah, I can't do this anymore. He's an anchor. Dad and Mom are too old to handle a baby, and you've always been the practical one. I'm going to Florida with a friend. Don't look for me. Take care of Leo." I stood on that porch in the freezing damp, holding a 6-month-old baby whose fingers were already purple from the cold. I looked down the empty street. No headlights. No signs of a car turning back. I carried him inside, wrapped him in a dry towel, and held him against my chest until his breathing slowed down and his skin grew warm. I called my parents immediately. Arthur answered, his voice tight and defensive before I could even finish the sentence. "Sarah, your sister is going through a phase. She needs to find herself. You have a stable job, you have the spare bedroom, and it's only temporary. Don't make a scene." Eleanor got on the line next, her voice pitched in that rehearsed register she used to smooth over disasters. "It's family duty, Sarah. We'll help when we can, but our health isn't what it used to be. Just watch him until the spring." The spring came and went, then 5 springs, then 15. Megan didn't send a postcard. She didn't call on his birthdays. She didn't contribute a single dollar toward his diapers, his shoes, or his asthma inhalers. When I asked my parents for help during a brutal winter when the heating bill doubled, Arthur sighed and said his shop was struggling, while Eleanor quietly bought Megan a new designer coat for her birthday because poor Megan was struggling down south. I realized early on that if Leo was going to survive, he was going to do it on my terms, with my hands holding the structural beams place. I legally obtained formal kinship guardianship through the county court in 2009. I hired a local legal aid attorney named Robert Vance, using $1,500 I'd saved by skipping lunches and driving my old sedan with a broken air conditioner for 2 summers. The guardianship gave me legal authority to enroll Leo in school and handle his medical care, but it didn't terminate Megan's parental rights completely, a detail my parents insisted on because terminating her rights would look like a public admission of failure for the family name. Leo grew into a boy who looked nothing like Megan. He had dark, thoughtful eyes, a quiet disposition, and a habit of counting his fingers when he was deep in thought, a trait he caught from watching me track figures at the kitchen table. He was a brilliant, analytical child. By the time he was 10, he could take apart a broken toaster and rebuild it so it ran smoother than before. While my parents doted on Megan's rare, dramatic text updates about her new marketing ventures in Miami, Leo and I built a quiet, airtight world brick by brick. Every Saturday morning, we'd drive to the regional park, sit on a sagging wooden bench, and watch the cargo planes take off from the regional airport. Leo would trace their flight paths in the air with his index finger, his face completely serious. "I'm going to build those someday, Aunt Sarah," he'd whisper. "I'm going to make them go higher." I held that promise like oxygen. I opened a separate educational savings fund for him at First National Bank of Ohio when he was 12, depositing $75 every month out of my modest paycheck. I kept the receipts in a neat shoe box under my bed, pressed between a wallet-sized photo of Leo's first day of kindergarten and his middle school science fair ribbon. My parents never asked how the fund was growing. They never contributed a single dollar. Then, when Leo turned 17, my grandfather, Harold Marshall, passed away. Harold was a stubborn, eagle-eyed man who had founded Marshall Lumber back in 1968 and sold it for a substantial fortune in the late 90s. He was the only person in our family who had ever looked at my parents' blatant favoritism with disgust. On his deathbed at Mercyhurst Medical Center, he called me into his room. His hand was papery and thin, but his grip was surprisingly firm. "Sarah," he whispered, his voice dry as sawdust. "Your father is a fool and your sister is a thief. I've set up a trust for the boy, $4 million. It vests when he turns 19. But I had to use standard corporate structures to avoid your father's business liabilities. The trust documents require the signatures of the legal beneficiary and the biological mother listed on the birth record to release the primary capital, as a safeguard I couldn't undo in time." He squeezed my hand once, his eyes fierce. "Don't let her take it, Sarah. Protect the boy." Harold died the next morning. The trust was established, locked behind a legal wall that required 2 keys to open: Leo's signature at age 19 and the signature of Megan Marshall, biological mother. I kept the trust existence a secret from everyone, including my parents. I knew that if Arthur and Eleanor found out there was $4 million anchored to Leo's name, Megan would be on the next flight north before the funeral flowers wilted. For 2 years, the clock ticked in silence. Leo graduated high school top of his class and was accepted into the university's elite aerospace program. We celebrated at the kitchen table with a markdown cake and 2 glasses of apple cider. I looked at him, his shoulders broad now, his face holding the mature focus of a young professional, and I told myself we had made it. We had climbed the mountain without them. Then came last week, Thursday night, January, present day. Leo turned 19. I booked a table at the Riverside Bistro, a small, candle-lit restaurant near the water that served the kind of steaks Arthur only bought when he wanted to impress a new client. It was supposed to be a quiet dinner. Just me, Leo, and my childhood friend Margaret, who had acted as Leo's honorary aunt for 15 years. At 7:15 p.m., the front doors of the bistro opened, letting in a blast of freezing January wind. I looked up, expecting the waiter with our drinks. Instead, I saw a woman in a cream silk trench coat, carrying a designer leather tote that caught the ambient light of the chandeliers. Golden hair, bright blue eyes, and a face that hadn't changed in 19 years because she had never carried the weight of a single sleepless night. Beside her was a silver-haired man in a tailored charcoal suit, holding a heavy manila folder. Megan. She walked straight to our table, her heels striking the hardwood in a sharp, practiced rhythm that made my chest tighten instantly. She didn't look at me. She didn't look at Margaret. Her eyes dropped to Leo, who went completely rigid in his chair, his fork hovering 2 inches above his plate. "Happy birthday, Leo," Megan said, her voice smooth as syrup, carrying that boardroom authority she'd adopted somewhere down south. "You've grown up so handsome. You look exactly like the Marshall side." Leo looked at me, his eyes wide and completely unmoored. "Aunt Sarah, who is this?" Megan laughed, a sharp, performative sound that echoed off the brick walls of the bistro. She pulled out a chair without asking, sat down elegantly, and gestured for her attorney to take the seat beside her. "Oh, sweetie," Megan said, leaning forward so close I could smell her expensive vanilla perfume. "I'm not just a stranger, I'm your mother. And tonight, now that you're officially 19, it's time we talk about your real inheritance." She tapped the manila folder in front of her attorney. The silver-haired man opened the clasp with 2 precise, mechanical clicks and slid a thick stack of legal documents across the white tablecloth, right over Leo's birthday placards. I pressed my hands flat against the edge of the table to steady myself. "Megan, get out of here. You have no right to be in this room." Megan didn't flinch. She adjusted a gold Cartier bracelet on her wrist, smiled that locked-gate smile, and looked directly at the boy I had spent 19 years protecting. "Actually, Sarah, I have every right," Megan said quietly, her tone dripping with false sympathy. "My attorney, Mr. Briggs, spent the last month verifying the terms of Grandfather Harold's trust. $4 million locked behind a biological signature requirement. I signed the authorization forms this morning at the county recorder's office. Now all we need is Leo's signature, and the funds distribute directly into a joint account I've already set up for us." She leaned closer to Leo, her eyes calculating, measuring, recalibrating the distance between the boy and the money. "Your Aunt Sarah has been very nice, Leo. A stable little life," Megan whispered, her fingers resting on the edge of the legal packet. "But a guidance counselor can't buy you a career in aerospace. I have the connections in Miami. I have the capital. Thanks for doing the heavy lifting, Sarah. I'll take it from here." The restaurant around us seemed to pull back like a tide. I looked at the legal packet, then at my sister's flawless, unbothered face, and then at Leo, whose index finger had begun to count against his knee under the table, desperate for a rhythm that made sense. The ambient chatter of the Riverside Bistro felt like a distant hum, swallowed by the sudden, freezing weight of my sister's words. Leo sat entirely motionless, his dark eyes darting from the thick stack of legal papers to my face, looking for the anchor he had relied on his entire life. His index finger kept beating a frantic, invisible rhythm against his jeans under the tablecloth. "Sarah, let's not make a scene in a public establishment," Megan said, her voice dropping into that practiced, patronizing warmth she used whenever she wanted to sound like the most reasonable person in the room. She reached into her designer bag, pulled out a pair of gold-rimmed reading glasses, and gestured to her attorney, Mr. Briggs. "Mr. Briggs is a senior partner at Briggs, Sterling and Associates in Columbus. Everything is entirely documented, entirely legitimate. Grandfather Harold's trust is very specific. It requires my biological authorization as his mother on record. Without me, that money sits in a dead account forever. I'm simply doing what's best for my son." "Your son," I said, the words cutting through the candlelight like ice. I didn't raise my voice. 19 years of managing high school corridors and crisis interventions had trained me to keep my tone flat, level, and structural. "You haven't seen him since he was 6 months old, Megan. You didn't know his first word. You didn't see him break his collarbone in middle school. You didn't contribute a single dollar to his inhalers or his tuition. You don't get to walk into a restaurant after 2 decades of silence and call him your son." Megan adjusted her cream silk trench coat, her expression shifting from false sympathy to an icy, absolute indifference. The law doesn't care about bedtime stories, Sarah. The law cares about biology and the explicit wording of a trust instrument. Harold used my name on the original documentation. I've already verified it with the estate trustees. She turned her gaze back to Leo, her eyes tracking his features with a cold, predatory calculation. Leo, sweetie, look at me. You're a smart boy. You're going into aerospace engineering. You understand systems. Your Aunt Sarah is a guidance counselor. She thinks in small, local circles. I'm offering you a penthouse in Miami, an immediate position on the board of a tech investment group I partner with, and $4 million clear. All you have to do is sign the designation form. Mr. Briggs unscrewed the cap of a heavy silver fountain pen and laid it precisely on top of the manila folder. The successor designation requires both signatures to bypass probate delays, young man. If you sign tonight, the preliminary capital can be wired to the joint account by Monday morning. Leo looked down at the pen. His hand trembled slightly as he reached out toward the table. Leo, don't touch it, I said, my voice steady but absolute. Megan snapped her head toward me, the veneer of sisterly politeness cracking entirely. Don't interfere with his future, Sarah. You've kept him in this dead-end town for 19 years out of your own loneliness. You used him as a substitute for a life you never built for yourself. You're being selfish. Margaret, who had been sitting quietly beside me, slammed her water glass onto the table, the clink echoing sharply. Megan, shut your mouth. You abandoned this baby in the freezing rain. I was the one who drove Sarah to the pharmacy at midnight when his fever hit 104. You have no right to speak to her about selfishness. Margaret, this is a family matter. Stay out of it, Megan hissed, her blue eyes flashing with a familiar, toxic volatility I hadn't seen since we were in our 20s. She stood up, smoothing the front of her designer dress, and looked down at us like a judge delivering a decree. Leo, I'll give you until tomorrow morning. Mr. Briggs and I are staying at the Grand Plaza downtown. Come to the suite at 10:00 a.m. We can sign the papers, pack your things, and put this town behind us. Don't let your aunt's bitterness drag you down. She turned on her scuffed heels, the only indicator that her high-flying lifestyle down south was built on shifting sand, and walked toward the exit. Mr. Briggs gathered the unsigned papers, slid them back into his folder with 2 mechanical clicks of the clasp, and followed her into the freezing January night. The table went completely still. Leo stared at the empty space where the legal documents had just been. He looked smaller now, stripped of the adult confidence he had worn when we first walked into the bistro. Aunt Sarah, he whispered, his voice cracking down the center. Did she really leave me in the rain? I reached across the table and wrapped my hands around his. His skin was cold. Yes, Leo, she did, but you were never abandoned. You were always wanted. By me. We didn't finish dinner. We drove home in silence, the heater in my old sedan blowing a dry, noisy draft through the cabin. When we got back to the house on Birch Lane, Leo went straight to his room, closing the door softly behind him. I sat at the kitchen table under the buzzing fluorescent light, my old master folder of family records laid out before me, and felt a profound, exhausting ache settle deep between my ribs. The clock was running out, and my sister had just laid a trap I didn't know how to dismantle. At 11:30 p.m., the kitchen phone rang. I picked it up before the second ring could wake Leo. Sarah, your sister called us. Arthur's voice came through the line, heavy, flat, and instantly defensive. She said you made a scene at the restaurant. She said you tried to keep her from seeing her own boy. Dad, she brought a lawyer to his birthday dinner to steal his grandfather's trust, I said, my hand gripping the plastic receiver so hard my knuckles went white. She hasn't contributed a single thing to his life in 19 years. How can you defend this? Eleanor got on the speaker, her voice pitched in that high, rehearsed register of passive-aggressive martyrdom. Sarah, Megan is your sister. She's had a difficult path and she's trying to make amends. $4 million is enough to help the whole family. Your father's shop needs the structural reinforcement, and Megan promised she'd take care of us if the trust goes through. Don't be difficult. Tell Leo to sign the papers. She's using you, Mom, just like she always has, I said, the realization settling into my bones like frost. "Enough, Sarah," Arthur barked, his old boardroom authority flaring up out of habit. "We are the head of this family. If you cause a legal battle over this, you are on your own. We won't support you, and we won't allow your bitterness to ruin your sister's chance to fix her life. Think about appearances." The line went dead. I set the receiver down gently. No slam, no drop, just the quiet, definitive click of a latch falling into place. My parents had made their choice. They had been making it my entire life. Megan provided the lie, and my parents' pride cemented it into place. I sat there until midnight, counting my breaths in the dark. Then I stood up, walked down the hallway to my bedroom, and pulled the old shoe box from under my bed. Tucked behind the kindergarten photo and the science fair ribbons was the small business card my grandfather had given me on his deathbed. It read, "Margaret Caldwell, attorney at law, T. Main and Marshall Trust Governance." I pulled out my phone and typed a message to the number on the back. "They're accelerating. Megan is here with an attorney from Columbus. They're targeting Leo Morning." Her reply came in exactly 3 minutes, sharp and steady as a metronome. "I've been waiting for this text for 2 years, Sarah. Come to my office at 8:00 a.m. alone. We're going to show your sister exactly how architecture holds up against a storm." The next morning, the rain had turned into a fine, gray sleet that coated the streets of Millfield in a dangerous, glassy sheen. I left Leo asleep at the house, drove downtown, and badged into the old brick building on Elm Street where Margaret Caldwell maintained her practice. Her office smelled like old paper, coffee, and dry cedar, a solid, unhurried space that felt entirely safe. Margaret was in her late 50s, silver-haired, with reading glasses hanging from a silver chain around her neck. She didn't look like a high-priced Columbus attorney. She looked like a woman who had spent 30 years reading the fine print that other people skipped because it was too tedious. She sat across from me and opened a thick green folder. "Your grandfather, Harold, was a very smart man, Sarah," Margaret said, sliding a document across the polished walnut desk. "He knew your father was financially reckless, and he knew Megan was a predator. When he set up the trust in 2017, he established it as a strict, irrevocable incentive structure. The clause requiring the biological mother's signature wasn't a gift to Megan. It was a trap." I squinted at the dense legal text, the letters swimming slightly before settling into focus. "A trap? How?" "Look at Clause 14b, Margaret said, tapping the page with her index finger. "The trust states that the biological mother must sign to release the primary capital only if her parental rights have not been legally superseded by a court-appointed primary caregiver under a state-recognized kinship decree prior to the beneficiary's 18th birthday. If such a decree exists, the signature requirement automatically transfers exclusively to the designated legal guardian." My chest tightened. "My kinship guardianship from 2009. "Exactly," Margaret allowed herself a small, dry smile. "Your sister thinks she holds the only key because she's listed on the birth certificate. She doesn't realize that the county court paperwork you filed 15 years ago automatically stripped her of that authority within the trust framework the moment Leo turned 18. Legally, her biological signature is entirely worthless. The only person who needs to sign to release those funds to Leo is you, as the successor trustee and former legal guardian." I sat back in my chair, the breath leaving my lungs in a long, shaking rush. Why didn't grandfather tell me? "Because he knew Megan was tracking the family records," Margaret said, removing her reading glasses. "If she had found out about that clause while Harold was alive, she would have filed an emergency motion to overturn your guardianship back then. He kept the signature requirement visible as bait to keep her quiet until Leo was an adult. He protected you by letting her believe she was in control." She slid a second document toward me, a single-page public notice stamped with the county registrar's seal. "This is a asterisk lis pendens and a trust beneficiary activation notice," Margaret explained, her voice hardening with professional steel. "I've already pre-filed it with the state probate court this morning at 7:45 a.m. It formally locks the trust structure under your exclusive guardianship status. If Megan or her attorney attempt to record any joint account or wire transfer against Harold's estate today, The system will automatically reject it on chain of title grounds. Megan has zero standing. What do we do now? I asked. Now, Margaret said, clicking her pen closed. We go to the Grand Plaza Hotel. Your sister has requested a meeting with Leo at 10:00 a.m. I think it's only fair that we deliver the response in person. At 9:50 a.m., I picked up Leo from the house. He was dressed in his university jacket, his face pale but set with a quiet, stubborn resolve he'd learned from years of studying structural mechanics. He didn't ask questions when he saw Margaret Caldwell sitting in the front seat of my sedan. He simply nodded, got into the back, and kept his hands flat on his knees. The lobby of the Grand Plaza Hotel was a sprawling, gilded space filled with marble columns and velvet chairs designed to look expensive, but holding no real warmth. Megan and Mr. Briggs were already waiting in the private mezzanine alcove, 2 coffees sitting untouched on the small glass table between them. My parents, Arthur and Eleanor, were there too, sitting rigidly on a nearby sofa, dressed in their finest church clothes, looking like they were waiting for a ribbon-cutting ceremony. As we approached, Megan stood up, her cream coat draped over her shoulders like armor, her bright blue eyes instantly locking onto Leo. "Leo, you came," Megan said, her voice lilting with that performative, theatrical excitement. She stepped forward, arms opening slightly for a hug she hadn't earned. "I knew you'd make the right choice. Mr. Briggs has the final wire authorization forms ready. Mom and Dad are here to witness it. We can finish this right now." Arthur stood up next, buttoning his jacket with deliberate slowness. "Sarah, let the boys sign. It's time to put this family back together. Megan has been very generous with her terms." I stepped in front of Leo, with Margaret Caldwell moving smoothly to my right side, her leather briefcase clutched firmly in her hand. "The boy isn't signing anything, Dad," I said, my voice echoing clearly against the marble floor of the mezzanine. Megan's smile vanished instantly, her lips pressing into a thin, white line. "Sarah, I told you to stay out of this. You're a third party here. Mr. Briggs, explain the biological signature requirement to her again. Apparently, a high school counselor struggles with basic legal text." Mr. Briggs stepped forward, opening his manila folder with those 2 familiar, mechanical clicks. "Ms. Marshall, as stated previously, the Marshall Lumber Trust cannot be executed without the biological maternal record signature. Your guardianship expired when the boy turned 18 under standard state code. You have no legal mechanism to block this distribution." Margaret Caldwell stepped into the gap. She didn't raise her voice, but the sheer, structural weight of her tone made Mr. Briggs pause mid-sentence. "My name is Margaret Caldwell, Senior Counsel for the Marshall Trust Governance," she said, pulling a certified, red wax-sealed document from her briefcase. "And you, Mr. Briggs, have failed to conduct a proper title and decree search on your client." She slid the document across the glass table, right over Megan's coffee cup. "This is the certified 2009 kinship caregiver decree filed in Millfield County, alongside Clause 14B of the Harold Marshall Irrevocable Trust," Margaret said evenly. "Under the explicit terms of the estate, because Megan Marshall abandoned the beneficiary and had her legal rights administratively superseded by a court-recognized guardian prior to the beneficiary's milestone age, her biological signature requirement was legally extinguished 2 years ago. The sole executing authority rests with Sarah Marshall." Megan stared at the paper. Her face went from that cream silk glow to a mottled, chalky white in a matter of seconds. "What? That's impossible. Dad, you said the guardianship was just temporary. You said it didn't change anything." Arthur blinked, his jaw working silently as he looked between his 2 daughters, the machinery of his mind trying to reassemble 19 years of absolute certainty that was crumbling in real time. "Mr. Briggs," Megan whispered, her voice cracking down the center, the calculations behind her eyes turning into pure, dawning terror. "Tell her she's wrong. Look at the paper." Mr. Briggs adjusted his reading glasses, his eyes scanning the red-sealed page. He stopped at the center paragraph, read it again, and then slowly closed the folder. His polished, corporate confidence evaporated, leaving him looking like a man who had just realized he was standing next to an explosion. "Ms. Marshall," Mr. Briggs said quietly, his voice stripped of all boardroom authority as he looked at Megan. "The chain of title is locked. Your signature is legally non-binding. We have no standing to claim these assets." The silence in the hotel mezzanine was absolute, heavy as stone, broken only by the wet, ragged sound of my mother's intake of breath. Eleanor sank onto the velvet sofa behind her, her hand shooting to my father's forearm, her fingers digging into the wool of his blazer with a force that I knew would leave dark, fingertip-shaped bruises by morning. Arthur didn't move. He stood completely rigid, his mouth half open, staring at the glass table where the red wax-sealed document sat like a live grenade. The proud, unyielding patriarch who had spent decades dictating the terms of our family's appearances had absolutely nothing to say. "Sarah," Megan's voice came out like gravel dragged over concrete, the high-flying Miami cadence entirely gone. She reached out toward Mr. Briggs, her manicured fingers clawing at his sleeve. "Do something. Tell them they can't do this. I'm his mother. The birth certificate." "The birth certificate records a biological event. Ms. Marshall," Margaret Caldwell interrupted, her tone sharp and clean as a scalpel. "This court decree records 19 years of structural reality. The trust recognizes the architecture that built the boy, not the ghost that left him on a porch." Mr. Briggs didn't defend her. He gathered his leather folder, his hands shaking slightly as he tucked the unsigned forms back into his briefcase. He looked at my sister, not with professional alignment, but with the cold, distant professional courtesy of an attorney who had just realized his client had walked him into a malpractice trap. "I'll be in the lobby, Megan. We have nothing left to execute here." He turned, his expensive wingtips clicking against the marble as he walked away, leaving her entirely exposed. Megan turned on me, the final remnants of her composure shattering into a raw, toxic rage. "You did this. You poisoned Harold against me. You stayed here, playing the martyr, calculating exactly how to trap me." "I didn't calculate anything, Megan," I said, my voice level, carrying the quiet steel I'd used to protect Leo his entire life. "I just stayed. I filled the vapor rub at 3:00 a.m. I paid the electricity bills. I drove the old sedan with the broken engine. You left because the child was an anchor, but you came back because the anchor turned into gold. You didn't want the boy, you wanted the inheritance." "Sarah, please," Eleanor sobbed from the couch, her hands clasped so tightly her knuckles were translucent. "Think of the family, your father's shop. The debts. Megan said she'd take care of us. $4 million is enough to save everything." I looked at my mother, really looked at her, and felt the last remaining thread of longing for their approval snap cleanly inside my chest. "You spent 19 years buying her coats while I bought his textbooks, Mom. You chose peace over fairness because loving Megan's performance was easier than seeing my truth. The trust belongs to Leo, not to Arthur's shop, not to Megan's lifestyle, and not to your illusions." Leo stepped forward then. He pulled his hands from his university jacket pockets. He looked at Megan, the woman whose blue eyes matched his biology but whose presence held zero weight in his memory. "I don't know who you are," Leo said quietly, his dark eyes steady, filled with the mature focus of a young man who had built his own ground. "But this woman is my mother. She's the one who stayed when the rain came sideways. If you ever come near our house or my university again, I'll have Aunt Margaret file a restraining order before Monday morning." Megan backed away, her designer tote swinging limply against her side. She looked at our parents, looking for the shield they had provided her entire life, but Arthur was staring at the floor, his shoulders shaking with the structural failure of a man who had finally realized the true cost of his pride. For the first time in 62 years, my father looked old, diminished, reached the end of his script. Megan turned and walked toward the elevators, her heels striking the floor in a frantic, uncoordinated rhythm. She had run out of rooms to hide in. We walked out of the Grand Plaza together, me, Leo, and Margaret Caldwell. The gray Ohio sleet was still falling, but as I unlocked the sedan, I felt the air clear around us, the suffocating pressure of 19 years evaporating into the January morning. Fast forward 6 months, June, present day. The Marshall Lumber Trust distributed automatically on Leo's 19th birthday, locked safely behind my signature as successor trustee. Not a single dollar went to Columbus or Miami. The capital remained anchored in a secure investment portfolio managed by Margaret Caldwell's firm, yielding enough dividends to cover Leo's aerospace tuition, his lab materials, and his living expenses for the next 4 years, with millions left to vest cleanly on his 30th birthday. The social fallout in Millfield rippled outward quietly, table by table. Arthur didn't contest the trust structure. He couldn't afford the legal fees, and Margaret's pre-filed asterisk lis pendens made any litigation a dead-end avenue. Instead, he did what he should have done a decade ago. He sold the auto repair shop at a substantial loss to settle his commercial debts and took a position as a night shift parts manager at a corporate dealership chain. My parents started family counseling in late February at a clinic in West Hartford, recommended by a therapist who didn't allow Arthur to dodge the fine print. My mother called me 3 weeks ago. Her voice was smaller, stripped of the rehearsed martyrdom. She didn't ask for money. She didn't mention Megan. She simply asked if she could bring a tin of homemade shortbread cookies to the house on Birch Lane for Leo's summer break. I told her yes. Apologies expire, but boundaries don't. I control the door now. I decide how wide it opens and who walks through the frame. Megan sent an email 2 months ago from a new address. It was 3 paragraphs long, devoid of flowery language or theatrical excuses. She admitted she had spent her real estate currency down south, that her marketing group had collapsed, and that she was currently working an administrative role at a pharmacy on Lincoln Avenue. She ended with, "I know you won't forgive me, Sarah. You carry the scar and I carry the emptiness. That's the math." I didn't reply. I placed the printed text inside the shoe box under my bed, right next to the $10 gas envelopes my grandfather used to leave on the porch. Same drawer, different side. Progress isn't an explosion. It's just a rearrangement of what you choose to carry. Today is Sunday morning. The early summer sun is coming through the kitchen window at a low angle, turning the walls the exact shade of gold my father's house used to hold before the white paint went on. The old porch screen door still squeaks a little on its hinge, but the latch holds cleanly now. Leo is sitting at the kitchen table, a blueprint for a high-altitude drone propulsion system spread across the Formica top. He's tracing the line with his index finger, his face completely serious, counting his rhythms as he calculates the stress loads on the wing joists. Margaret is at the stove, making coffee, the off-key radio singing something soft that nobody is fully listening to. The doorbell rings. I wipe my hands on a tea towel, walk down the short hallway, and open the front door. My parents are standing on the porch in their light summer coats. Arthur is holding a box of fresh strawberries from the market, his hands looking rough and grease-stained from his new night shift job. Eleanor is clutching her purse tight against her side, her face nervous but trying. "Hi, Sarah," Mom says, her voice quiet, honest, and completely unscripted. "Come in," I say, stepping back half a step, polite, defined. "The coffee is almost ready." Arthur steps inside, looking around the kitchen like he's cataloging a world he almost erased. He looks at Leo at the table. Leo looks up, nods once, and slides his blueprint over to make room for the strawberries. 4 plates. A quiet kitchen. A life built brick by brick with my own hands on my own terms. It's not the family reunion the movies promise, but it's real. And real is more than we had for a very long time.